Welcome to today's Explainer. We're looking at something today that sounds absolutely fantastic on paper, but can literally turn an entire economy upside down in practice. We're going to dive into how well-intentioned price protections can actually lead to some incredibly wild, unexpected economic drama.
So, get this. Can a guaranteed, legally mandated high price actually force sellers to break the law and sell their stuff on the black market? It sounds totally counterintuitive, right? Why on earth would you sell for less when the government literally guarantees you more? Well, let's unpack the fascinating and honestly sometimes disastrous unintended consequences of messing with market prices.
All right, let's dive right in. To really grasp the chaos here, we first got to understand the baseline rule. We're talking about a price floor, also known as a minimum price. Essentially, this is a legally fixed minimum price that a government sets above the natural equilibrium price. And the goal makes sense. It's to protect producer incomes, making sure farmers, for instance, can actually earn a decent living. But here is the absolute critical part. For a price floor to actually do anything, it literally has to be bolted firmly above the natural market equilibrium. Because if it's below what people are already paying, the market's just going to ignore it completely. Let's map out the basic laws of economic gravity for a second. We've got consumer demand, which slopes downwards, that's DD. Then we have producer supply, sloping upwards, that's SS. And right there in the dead center is point E, that's our equilibrium. At this magical little spot, the market price is exactly OP0 and the quantity traded is OQ0. Everyone's happy. Every single good produced gets sold, zero waste. But what happens when a government decides that this price, OP0, just isn't high enough for the producers to survive? Well, watch what happens when we bolt a brand new legal floor price, let's call it OP2, way up above that natural equilibrium. Because the price is suddenly artificially high, producers get super excited, right? So they ramp up production all the way out to OQ2. But the consumers, they take one look at that sky-high price and say, yeah, no thanks, and they drop their demand way down to OQ1. So now you've got this massive gap between Q1 and Q2. That whole distance from K to L, that is a colossal market surplus.
And honestly, this just perfectly illustrates the huge clash between policy intentions and market realities. The policy promise was super simple. Higher income for producers. The government basically stepped in and said, hey, we're going to force buyers to pay you more. But the market reality? Actual open market sales absolutely crash down to OQ1. You just can't force consumers to buy things they don't want or simply can't afford. So suddenly, these producers are just sitting on a massive mountain of goods that absolutely nobody is legally willing to buy.
Which brings us to the first major real-world effect of this whole policy, a ridiculously heavy market surplus that directly leads to some pretty desperate measures. Fixing a price above market equilibrium causes this massive pileup of unsold goods. And think about it. When producers have bills to pay and their products are literally just rotting away in warehouses, they get desperate.
Think of it kind of like this. Imagine a concert promoter sets a strict, legal minimum ticket price of 5,000 rupees for a local show, right? They're really trying to help the musicians make a good living. But at that high price, only 10 people actually buy tickets at the door. So desperate to cover their travel costs and just get somebody in those seats, the local bands start sneaking out to the back alleyway, whispering to fans and selling tickets for just 2,000 rupees just to clear out their inventory. And this exact same thing happens in the real economy. Farmers and producers, completely unable to find buyers at the high official price, might be forced to flout the law entirely and sell their goods illegally under the table, well below the government's minimum price, just to survive.
Now, obviously, that's a total disaster for the policy. If producers are out there selling in the black market for less than the minimum price, the entire policy has completely failed. So what do? How do we prevent this open market crash? How can the government actually save the system from an under-the-table collapse and enforce this minimum price for real? Well, to enforce that price, the government actually has to step in as the buyer of last resort, basically acting as a giant government shield. Let's look at India, for example. The Indian government directly steps in and purchases that unsold surplus grain from farmers at what's called the minimum support price, or MSP. They look at that massive surplus gap we were just talking about, buy it all up, and move it straight into state warehouses to build up the nation's buffer stock of food grains. I absolutely love to think of this as the giant state vacuum cleaner. It's like when private shoppers step back because the prices are just way too high, the government rolls in with these giant trucks, They fire up the vacuum, buy every single unsold sack of wheat at that high OP2 price, and just stack it to the ceiling inside national silos. It's a 2-for-1. It secures the farmers' incomes today and builds massive food security for the country's future.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is understanding this exact chain reaction. Ready? First, a legally fixed high price is set way above equilibrium. Boom. Second, a massive market surplus is instantly created. Third, because prices are so high, open market sales completely crash. Fourth, that crash forces desperate, under-the-table sales to occur. And finally, to save the whole system, the government steps in and procures that surplus as a buffer stock.
It's honestly an incredible sequence of economic dominoes falling. But I really want to leave you with a final thought to chew on today. If a price floor fundamentally requires the government to step in with that giant vacuum cleaner and literally buy everything that no one else wants, who's actually paying for that surplus? Where does all that money come from? That right there is the true hidden cost of market intervention. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the world around you, and I'll see you next time.